June 4, 2008. Mesa, Arizona. Travis Alexander's bathroom becomes a slaughter chamber as his ex-girlfriend Jodi Arias stabs him 27 times, slits his throat so deep it nearly decapitates him, and shoots him in the head, all while taking photographs of the murder in progress. The attack was so vicious that blood splattered across every surface of the small bathroom, creating a crime scene so brutal that seasoned homicide detectives would struggle to process what they were seeing. Travis had been stabbed in his back, chest, and head, with wounds so deep they penetrated vital organs and shattered bone, but the knife wounds weren't enough for Jodi. She dragged his dying body across the bathroom floor and slashed his throat with such force that she nearly severed his head completely. Then, as Travis lay bleeding to death, Jodi put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger, ensuring that the man who had tried to end their toxic relationship would never reject her again. But here's what makes this case truly shocking. Jodi had driven over 1,000 miles from her home in California to Travis's house in Arizona, bringing gas cans to avoid being tracked at gas stations, renting a car in a different color than she requested, and turning off her cell phone to hide her location. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a premeditated execution, disguised as a lover's quarrel. Jodi Arias wasn't some unhinged stalker with an obvious history of violence. She was a 28-year-old photographer who seemed normal to most people who knew her, working at restaurants and pursuing her artistic interests while maintaining the facade of a typical young woman navigating modern dating. But beneath that ordinary exterior was a woman whose obsession with Travis Alexander had transformed into a deadly fixation that would end in one of the most brutal murders in Arizona history. When police found the digital camera in Travis's washing machine, they discovered something that would make this case legendary. Jodi had accidentally photographed the murder itself, creating a timeline of violence that showed her attacking Travis in his own shower. The images captured the moment when a breakup conversation became a bloodbath. How does a relationship end in 27 stab wounds, a slashed throat, and a gunshot to the head? How does a seemingly normal photographer become so obsessed with an ex-boyfriend that she drives across state lines to butcher him in his own home? But Jodi Arias's blood-soaked bathroom was just the beginning of Arizona's darkest secrets. Welcome to Savage Case Files, where we expose the Grand Canyon State's deadliest female killers, women who turned Arizona's desert landscape into a hunting ground for murder. Subscribe if you love true crime documentaries like this one, because we're bringing you more cases that prove the desert sun can't hide the darkest evil. The next case will show you how border vigilante violence turned a 9-year-old girl into collateral damage in America's immigration wars. Case 2, Shauna Ford. May 3, 2009, Arivaca, Arizona. A quiet border town where 29-year-old Raul Flores and his 9-year-old daughter, Brasinia, were about to become victims of a deadly home invasion, led by anti-immigration vigilante Shauna Ford, who believed that murdering Mexican-American families was justified in her war against illegal immigration. Shauna wasn't some random criminal looking for easy targets to rob. She was the founder and leader of Minutemen American Defense, a vigilante group that patrolled the Arizona-Mexico border claiming to protect America from illegal immigrants. But Shauna's version of border protection involved armed robbery and murder disguised as patriotic duty. The home invasion began at 1 a.m. when Shauna and 2 accomplices knocked on the Flores family's door, claiming to be law enforcement officers searching for fugitives. When Raul opened the door, the armed intruders forced their way inside, demanding money and drugs they believed were hidden in the house. What followed was a massacre that would shock even Arizona's border communities accustomed to drug violence. Shauna and her team shot Raul Flores multiple times, killing him in front of his terrified family. But the killing didn't stop there. When 9-year-old Brasinia started crying and begging for her life, Shauna coldly executed the child with a gunshot to the head. Vrzenya's mother Gina was also shot but survived by playing dead, later providing crucial testimony that would expose Shauna's role as the mastermind behind the attack. The surviving victim's account revealed that this wasn't a random home invasion, but a targeted attack planned by Shauna to fund her vigilante operations. The investigation revealed that Shauna had been planning similar attacks on other Hispanic families in the area, viewing them as enemy combatants in her personal border war. She had recruited accomplices and developed a strategy of impersonating law enforcement to gain entry to homes before robbing and killing the occupants. Shauna's defense team tried to portray her as a misguided patriot who had been manipulated by her male accomplices, but the evidence showed that she had been the leader and primary planner of the deadly home invasion. Witness testimony proved that she had personally executed 9-year-old Brezenia in cold blood. At trial, prosecutors argued that Shauna had committed premeditated murder motivated by racial hatred and greed. The jury found her guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced her to death for the execution of a father and his young daughter. In 2011, Shauna Forday became one of only 3 women on Arizona's death row, her case serving as a stark reminder of how extremist ideology can justify the murder of innocent families. From vigilante murder to child torture in Arizona's most horrific case of family abuse. Case 3, Samantha Allen. July 2011. Phoenix, Arizona. 10-year-old Ame Deal was locked inside a plastic storage box by her aunt Samantha Allen as punishment for stealing a popsicle. But what started as discipline became a death sentence when the Arizona heat turned the container into a suffocating oven that killed the child. Samantha wasn't some overwhelmed guardian who accidentally harmed a child through poor judgment. She was part of a household that had been systematically torturing Ame for months, using increasingly brutal punishments that escalated from beatings to confinement in spaces so small they amounted to torture chambers. The fatal punishment occurred on a sweltering July day when temperatures reached over 100 degrees. Samantha and other family members forced Ame into a plastic storage box measuring just 31 inches long, 14 inches wide, and 12 inches deep, far too small for a 10-year-old child to fit comfortably. They then locked the box and left Ame trapped inside while they went about their daily activity. For hours, Ame suffered in the suffocating container as the Arizona heat turned her plastic prison into a death trap. She couldn't stretch her legs, couldn't sit up properly, and couldn't escape as the temperature inside the box climbed to lethal levels. Her small body was slowly cooking alive while her family ignored her desperate pleas for release. When they finally opened the box, Ame was unconscious and barely breathing. Instead of immediately calling for medical help, the family waited precious minutes before contacting emergency services, claiming the child had simply gotten sick while playing outside. Paramedics rushed Ame to the hospital, but the damage was already done. She had suffered severe hyperthermia and dehydration that caused multiple organ failure. Despite medical intervention, Ame died from the torture her own family had inflicted as punishment for taking a popsicle. The investigation revealed a horrific pattern of abuse that had been escalating for months before Ame's death. The child had been forced to eat dog feces, locked in closets for hours, beaten with wooden paddles, and subjected to other forms of systematic torture that the family called discipline. Samantha's role as one of the primary abusers became clear when investigators uncovered evidence of her participation in the torture regime. She had been an active participant in the abuse that culminated in Ame's death, making her equally responsible for the murder. At trial, prosecutors argued that Samantha had committed first-degree murder through child abuse, showing that the storage box punishment was part of a pattern of escalating violence designed to cause maximum suffering. The jury agreed and sentenced her to death. In 2017, Samantha Allen joined Arizona's death row for the torture murder of her 10-year-old cousin, though her sentence was later reduced to life without parole in 2023. From child torture to spousal poisoning in a case of deadly deception. Case 4, Wendy Andriano. October 8, 2000, Mesa, Arizona. Wendy Andriano was supposed to be caring for her terminally ill husband Joe as he battled cancer, but instead of providing comfort during his final days, she was slowly poisoning him with sodium azide while planning to finish him off with a brutal beating. Wendy wasn't some desperate wife overwhelmed by the burden of caring for a dying spouse. She was a woman who saw her husband's terminal diagnosis as an opportunity to collect his life insurance money faster than cancer would naturally take him. Joe's illness provided the perfect cover for murder. Who would suspect that a devoted wife was actually accelerating her husband's death? The poisoning campaign began subtly, with Wendy administering small doses of sodium azide through Joe's food and medication. The chemical caused symptoms that mimicked his existing cancer treatment side effects, making it nearly impossible for doctors to detect that he was being systematically poisoned by his own wife. But Wendy grew impatient with the slow pace of the poisoning. On that October night, she decided to end Joe's life more directly. While he lay weakened from months of secret poisoning, Wendy grabbed a wooden bar stool and began bludgeoning her dying husband with savage force. The attack was so violent that neighbors heard the commotion and called police. When officers arrived, they found Joe barely alive with massive head trauma from the beating. Wendy claimed that her husband had fallen and hit his head, but the pattern of injuries told a different story. This was deliberate violence, not an accident. Joe died from his injuries, and the subsequent autopsy revealed the shocking truth about what had really been happening in their home. Toxicology tests showed lethal levels of sodium azide in his system, proving that Wendy had been poisoning him for weeks or months before delivering the final beating. The investigation uncovered evidence of Wendy's elaborate murder plot, including her purchase of the sodium azide and her research into how the chemical could be used to kill someone. Financial records showed that she stood to collect significant life insurance payouts upon Joe's death, providing a clear motive for the murder. Wendy's defense team tried to argue that she had been driven to desperation by the stress of caring for a terminally ill spouse, but the evidence of premeditation was overwhelming. The poisoning campaign proved that she had been planning Joe's murder for an extended period, not acting in a moment of crisis. At trial, prosecutors presented evidence that Wendy had committed first-degree murder through both poisoning and bludgeoning, showing that she had used multiple methods to ensure her husband's death. The jury found her guilty and sentenced her to death. In 2004, Wendy Andriano joined Arizona's death row for the murder of her terminally ill husband, though her case remains under appeal, with resentencing proceedings still pending. From poison, murder to torture killing in Arizona's most disturbing hate crime. Case 5, Angela Simpson. August 6, 2009, Phoenix, Arizona. Angela Simpson lured 46-year-old Terry Neely, a disabled man with the mental capacity of a 12-year-old, to an abandoned house where she would spend hours torturing him to death simply because she hated disabled people and wanted to see him suffer. Angela wasn't some random criminal who targeted Terry for robbery or personal gain. She was a woman driven by pure hatred for disabled individuals, viewing Terry's developmental disabilities as justification for the most brutal torture imaginable. Her motive was nothing more than sadistic pleasure derived from inflicting pain on someone she considered inferior. The torture session lasted for hours in the abandoned Phoenix house, where Angela subjected Terry to unimaginable cruelty. She beat him with various objects, burned him with cigarettes, and inflicted wounds designed to cause maximum pain without immediately killing him. Terry's disabilities made him unable to defend himself or escape, leaving him completely helpless against Angela's violence. When Angela finally grew tired of torturing Terry, she killed him and then mutilated his body in ways so disturbing that court records remained sealed to protect the public from the graphic details. She treated his corpse like a trophy, taking photographs and keeping souvenirs from her victim as reminders of the torture she had inflicted. But Angela's most shocking moment came during her trial, when she stood up in open court and confessed to the murder with chilling pride. She described the torture in graphic detail, showing no remorse for her actions and actually seeming to enjoy reliving the violence she had inflicted on Terry. "I killed him," Angela told the stunned courtroom. "I beat him, I tortured him, and I loved every minute of it. He was disabled, and I hate disabled people. I wanted to see him suffer, and I did." The confession was so disturbing that even seasoned court reporters and bailiffs struggled to maintain their composure. Angela's complete lack of remorse and her obvious pleasure in describing the torture made it clear that she was a dangerous predator who would kill again if given the opportunity. The investigation had already established Angela's guilt through physical evidence and witness testimony, but her open court confession removed any doubt about her role in Terry's murder. She had planned the torture, carried it out over several hours, and felt no regret about destroying an innocent man's life. At sentencing, prosecutors argued that Angela represented the worst kind of killer, someone who murdered for pure sadistic pleasure rather than money, passion, or self-defense. The judge agreed and sentenced her to natural life in prison, with no possibility of parole. Angela Simpson remains incarcerated in Arizona, serving a sentence that ensures she will never again have the opportunity to torture disabled individuals or anyone else. From torture, murder to hammer attack in another case of domestic violence turned deadly, Case 6, Marissa DeVault. January 14, 2009. Gilbert, Arizona. Marissa DeVault crept into her bedroom where her husband Dale was sleeping peacefully, raised a claw hammer above her head, and brought it crashing down on his skull with enough force to shatter bone and spray blood across their marital bed. Marissa wasn't some battered wife who finally fought back against years of abuse in a moment of desperation. She was a woman drowning in debt who saw her husband's life insurance policy as the solution to her financial problems, making murder more attractive than divorce or bankruptcy. The attack occurred in the early morning hours while Dale slept, completely unaware that his wife of several years was about to turn their bedroom into a crime scene. Marissa struck him repeatedly with the hammer, focusing her blows on his head and face in an attempt to ensure that he would never wake up. Dale survived the initial attack but was left with catastrophic brain injuries that would eventually prove fatal. He lingered in the hospital for weeks, unable to speak or identify his attacker, while Marissa played the role of the devoted wife praying for her husband's recovery. When Dale finally died from his injuries, Marissa collected on his life insurance policies and began planning her new life as a wealthy widow. She had successfully eliminated her financial problems by murdering the man who had trusted her with his life. But the investigation revealed inconsistencies in Marissa's story about what had happened that night. She claimed that an intruder had broken into their home and attacked Dale while she hid in fear. But physical evidence contradicted her version of events. Blood spatter analysis showed that the attack had occurred from close range, with no signs of forced entry or struggle that would indicate a home invasion. The hammer used in the attack was found to belong to the DeVault household, and Marissa's fingerprints were discovered on the weapon. Financial records revealed Marissa's desperate money situation and her knowledge of Dale's life insurance policies, providing a clear motive for the murder. She had been facing foreclosure, bankruptcy, and mounting debts that Dale's death would eliminate through insurance payouts. Marissa's defense team tried to argue that she had been acting in self-defense against an abusive husband, but the evidence showed that Dale had been asleep and defenseless when she attacked him. The premeditated nature of the crime was proven through her financial research and the deliberate choice of weapon. At trial, prosecutors argued that Marissa had committed first-degree murder for financial gain, using a hammer to bludgeon her sleeping husband to death. The jury rejected her self-defense claims and found her guilty of premeditated murder. In 2014, Marissa DeVault was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the hammer murder of her husband Dale. From hammer murder to socialite bombing in Arizona's most elaborate murder-for-hire conspiracy. Case 7, Pamela Phillips. November 1, 1996. Tucson, Arizona. Wealthy socialist Pamela Phillips was locked in a bitter divorce battle with ex-husband Gary Triano when she decided that a car bomb would be more profitable than splitting their assets in court. Hiring a hitman to blow up the man who had once been her partner in high society. Pamela wasn't some desperate woman facing poverty after divorce. She was a well-connected socialite who moved in Tucson's elite circles, attending charity galas and country club events, while secretly plotting her ex-husband's murder for financial gain. Gary Triano was a successful real estate developer and casino owner whose wealth had attracted Pamela during their marriage, but their relationship had soured into a contentious divorce that threatened to cost her millions in settlement payments. Rather than accept a reduced lifestyle, Pamela chose murder as her preferred method of wealth preservation. The bombing occurred at the La Paloma Country Club, where Gary had just finished playing golf with friends. As he started his Lincoln Continental in the parking lot, a pipe bomb hidden beneath the vehicle exploded with enough force to kill him instantly and destroy the car completely. The explosion was so powerful that it shattered windows in nearby buildings and could be heard for miles. Gary's body was so badly damaged by the blast that identification required dental records, while pieces of his car were scattered across the country club grounds. For 18 years, the case remained unsolved as investigators struggled to identify the bomber and determine the motive behind Gary's murder. Pamela had moved to Europe after the killing, living a luxurious lifestyle funded by her ex-husband's life insurance policies and estate. The breakthrough came when investigators finally connected Pamela to Ron Young, a former casino associate who had agreed to carry out the bombing in exchange for payment. Financial records showed suspicious money transfers between Pamela and Young around the time of Gary's murder. Young eventually confessed to building and planting the bomb, but testified that Pamela had been the mastermind who hired him to kill her ex-husband. He provided detailed information about their conspiracy, including how Pamela had provided Gary's schedule and vehicle information to make the bombing possible. The investigation revealed that Pamela had been planning Gary's murder for months, researching bomb-making techniques and recruiting Young to carry out the actual killing. She had treated her ex-husband's life as nothing more than an obstacle to her continued wealth and social status. At trial, prosecutors argued that Pamela had committed first-degree murder through a murder-for-hire conspiracy, using a car bomb to eliminate her ex-husband for financial gain. The jury found her guilty of premeditated murder, despite her claims of innocence. In 2014, Pamela Phillips was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the car bomb murder of Gary Triano, ending one of Arizona's longest-running cold cases. From bombing plot to dismemberment murder in Arizona's final case of spousal violence. Case 8. Marjorie Orban. September 8, 2004, Phoenix, Arizona. Marjorie Orban reported her husband Jay missing after he failed to return from a business trip, but the successful businessman wasn't traveling, he was already dead, dismembered by his wife, and scattered across the Arizona desert in pieces. Marjorie wasn't some panicked wife worried about her missing spouse. She was a woman who had murdered Jay in their family home, then spent days methodically cutting up his body and disposing of the pieces in remote desert locations, where she hoped they would never be found. Jay Orban was a prosperous businessman who dealt in Native American artifacts and jewelry, traveling frequently for work while trusting his wife to manage their household and care for their young son. He had no idea that Marjorie was planning his murder while he focused on building their financial future. The killing occurred in their Phoenix home, where Marjorie attacked Jay with enough violence to cause his death. The exact method of murder remains unclear because of the extensive dismemberment that followed, but evidence showed that she had killed him deliberately, rather than in self-defense or during an argument. After murdering Jay, Marjorie began the gruesome process of dismembering his body to make disposal easier and identification more difficult. She used power tools to cut him into pieces, then loaded the body parts into containers for transport to various dump sites across the desert. The investigation began when Jay's business associates became concerned about his prolonged absence and contacted police. Marjorie's story about his business trip fell apart when investigators discovered that Jay had never left Phoenix and had no scheduled meetings during the time she claimed he was traveling. The breakthrough came when hikers discovered a plastic storage tub in the desert containing Jay's torso. The remains were badly decomposed, but still identifiable through dental records and distinctive tattoos that confirmed the victim's identity. Despite extensive searches of the Arizona desert, Jay's head and limbs were never recovered. Marjorie had successfully hidden those body parts in locations that remain unknown, taking the secret of their disposal to prison with her. The evidence against Marjorie included financial records showing her motive for murder, witness testimony about her suspicious behavior after Jay's disappearance, and forensic evidence linking her to the dismemberment and disposal of his remains. Marjorie's defense team tried to argue that Jay had been killed by business associates involved in illegal artifact trafficking, but prosecutors proved that she had been the only person with access to Jay during the time of his murder and dismemberment. At trial, the jury found Marjorie guilty of first-degree murder despite the absence of Jay's complete remains. The evidence of premeditation and the deliberate dismemberment proved that she had planned and executed his murder with cold deliberation. In 2009, Marjorie Orban was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder and dismemberment of her husband Jay. From dismemberment to the final reckoning of Arizona's deadliest women. 8 women, 20 years of violence, dozens of innocent lives destroyed across Arizona's desert landscape. These cases force us to confront questions with no easy answers. Should Jodi Arias have received the death penalty for her premeditated torture murder? Does Arizona's legal system treat female killers differently than male murderers who commit similar crimes? How do we balance understanding the factors that create killers with holding them accountable for their choices? The desert landscape that defines Arizona became both a dumping ground for victims and a metaphor for the emotional wasteland these women created in their wake. They turned the state's natural beauty into a backdrop for unimaginable violence. Which case shocked you most? Should more of these women have received the death penalty? Do you think Arizona's justice system handles female murderers fairly compared to male killers? What does it say about our society that we're still surprised when women commit the most brutal crimes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, but remember, understanding these killers isn't about excusing their actions. It's about recognizing that evil doesn't discriminate by gender, social status, or family relationships. Subscribe for more cases that prove darkness hides in plain sight, because in Arizona, even the desert sun can't expose all the evil that lurks beneath the surface.